first one is, which is the background of the European immigration crisis in matters of the Middle East conflict?
Okay, this is actually an older issue, starting in 2011, all the way from the Arab Spring, when the issue of Libyans came across to the European Union in order to flee the war. And it's continued on to where now the crisis is evident in the Syrian civil war, which has turned out to be a magnitude that European Union has not faced, expected, and has not really been able to adjust to in any kind of cohesive way. The issue with the Syrian war is due to the repression of Bashar al-Assad, the government has, the people have responded by violently trying to overthrow the government, and the government has responded by continuing its repression, and this has brought in international support from various sides, and it's complicated the issue on top of probably the strongest terrorist organization the modern world has seen with ISIS, and this conflict has gotten very, very brutal and violent, and has caused 11 million of the 22 million people who used to live in Syria to flee their country. Many of those, as you normally would expect, flee to neighboring nations, Turkey, Jordan, and Lebanon, and that's where probably half of those people are. Now, unfortunately, unfortunately, these countries obviously can't handle that many people, so these people have, and this war has dragged on for 5+ years. So in that sense, many of these people have sought locations somewhere else to live in peace and security, and that location has been the choice of Europe, just simple by being able to get into a boat and go across the Mediterranean to get to Italy, or through the landmass to Greece. What has happened is now Europe has experienced a massive immigration crisis due to the Syrian civil war.
Go through the second question.
All right.
Okay. According to your point of view, which are the real interests of German government when it comes to helping the refugees?
Germany, through its history, obviously with the Holocaust and its image from World War II that has haunted it, it's been a culture that has in history seen itself as a superior race, as inferior races needing to serve others underneath them. So in this particular case, Germany has an image problem, and I think in this case Angela Merkel, who's a Chancellor of Germany, saw an opportunity here with the immigration crisis to really kind of change that image, or to at least pull away from that image of the past and show that Germany is an inclusive culture, that it can handle a society of multi-ethnicity. And I think when she went on the air and she said that the nation would accept warmly and welcomingly these Syrian and various other Middle Eastern refugees, I think she meant it. So I think as a nation there was a genuine, and you saw this, I mean, I saw this on TV, you saw Germans coming and giving them hugs and gift baskets and candy for the little kids. So I think, you know, not just Angela Merkel, but the entire society with this time was really welcoming them. Now I think what's happened is what most conservatives also fear and say, well, you shouldn't openly welcome refugees, because what happens is when you're perceived as the nation who is welcoming and warm to refugees, especially when there's a high demand like this, then they're all going to come, and all of them have came. And what Germany has discovered is economically, facility-wise, they're not ready to handle this many immigrants. They don't know where to put them, what to do with them. Long waits. I've heard documentaries where people are waiting in refugee camps for months, even a year, before they can even get the refugee status. And that's simply just because they're not ready to handle this amount of influx of people. And so what we've seen now is a more pragmatic tactic by Angela Merkel to kind of stop the immigrants from coming, and that's where we see this New Deal that they have with Turkey, in order to kind of have Turkey stop the immigrants from initially even coming into Europe, in exchange, obviously, for visa-free travel by the Turks. This is very controversial at the time because Turkey has experienced a lot of negative images due to Erdogan's authoritative rule. Freedom of speech has been greatly reduced. The nation should not even be considered for advancement into the European Union at this point in time. And so because of this negotiation that they're doing, he's been able to use the refugees as a tactic in order to gain that. And Angela Merkel has been willing to do that because she needs to stop the flow, or at least slow down the flow of refugees, so that Germany can bring them in successfully, and hopefully in a way that the German society doesn't reject them, which is also a great fear.
Possible solutions may be suitable for tackling the refugees issue.
Unfortunately, I don't think there's any ideal solution for tackling the European refugee crisis at this moment. There's no way of stopping the refugees. When people become this desperate, when it's a matter of life or death, and they're given no choice, they're going to try and get to what they deem as a safe location, no matter what, and no one's going to no one's going to be able to stop them unless it's an actual physical stopping. Now, the problem with this refugee crisis has been that the European Union has not acted as one voice. The supranational identity of the European Union has actually quite failed in this regard. What has happened is we've seen them gone to more of an intergovernmental ideology where their own sovereignty plays the bigger role than the larger group, and their own national interests take precedent over the regional organization's interests. And so we've seen a lot of internal division and fighting, and they can't seem to agree on what actions to take. And even when they agree on it, the enforcement issue becomes very, very difficult. Ideally, the solution would be that they would overturn the Dublin regulation, which requires that the first entry of a immigrant or a refugee, whatever nation they first set their foot into, that nation has to be the one to process them, has to be the one to clothe them, feed them, get them taken care of. And unfortunately, this process is very, very unfair because this puts unfair pressure on 3 countries, namely Spain, Italy, and Greece, who have to handle most of the refugees. And unfortunately, these countries are also, as we know, with the the Euro crisis. Greece is not exactly equipped to handle economically its own citizens, let alone massive refugees. Spain has 25% unemployment. You look at Italy; it's also suffering a lot in that sense. So the 3 countries that are unable to really take care of it are the ones being demanded to take care of this kind of crisis. And it's sort of that idea of it's your problem, not my problem, kind of deal. And what we've seen as a normal reaction is we've seen countries like Greece who basically said, well, okay, if you're going to be unfair about this, then we're just going to let those refugees go right across the border and go straight into Europe. And so that's caused a lot of arguing back and forth among the nations. And the issue has gotten very convoluted, and there's a lot of Eastern European countries especially that have taken a very hardline stance to this immigration of not letting people in. And so we've seen no coherent, unified reaction to this, and therefore it's been very patchwork and really not successful solutions to this. Ideally is if they would get rid of the Dublin regulation and start to build and put lots of money towards refugee centers in these countries of location when they first come in, so that then Greece and other countries don't take an unfair burden on this. And you'd have to say then probably a quota system, which they've tried to do unsuccessfully. But if they were to successfully do a quota system, each country would agree to take on a certain number of refugees based on their economic situation, and then those people would then get distributed to those various countries. Would probably be the ideal solution. Well, take that back. Number one ideal solution would be to solve the problem in Syria. No civil war, peace would then bring about the stop of the massive amounts of immigration. That's probably more unlikely than the quota system working in the European Union. So in that sense, there are possible solutions, but I don't think there's any real possible solutions in the future here. So as it is right now, I think we are going to constantly be living in a little bit of limbo, and I don't think you're going to see the European Union come up with a solution on this, and I don't think any of the international powers are going to come up with a solution in the Syrian war. So right now we're just going to have to live with what we have at this moment, and based on each individual country. In the meantime, you're going to see a lot of suffering. You'll still see children wash up on shores of the Mediterranean dead. You're going to see families ripped apart. You're going to see it's going to take a massive human toll, this entire process.